The call came in on a Tuesday morning, September 8, 2025. A worker at a Hollywood tow yard dialed 911 and said three words that stopped everything. There's a smell. Not smoke. Not chemicals. The kind of smell that tells every first responder everything they need to know before they even open a door. Officers arrived at the lot and approached a white Tesla, abandoned, towed off a street in the Hollywood Hills weeks earlier. No one had come to claim it. No one had asked about it. And when they opened the front trunk, what they found inside would shake an entire nation awake. This is the story of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a 14-year-old girl from a small California town. A girl with big curly hair and a Hello Kitty backpack. A girl who should have been in school. And this is the story of how a rising music star, a man who sang about romantic homicide to millions of fans, allegedly became the last person she ever saw. This is the Cold Case Chronicles. Stay with me, because this story has layers, and every single one of them will make your stomach drop. Lake Elsinore is not the kind of place most people think about when they think of California. It is not Los Angeles with its gleaming skylines. It is not Malibu with its beach houses. Lake Elsinore is a quiet inland empire city, the kind of place where working class stretch their dollars to afford a small yard and a little piece of peace. The kind of place where kids ride bikes down the block and corner store owners know everyone by name. Celeste grew up in that world. She was the daughter of Jesus Rivas and Mercedes Martinez, immigrants from El Salvador who had built a life in this unassuming suburb. She attended Lakeland Village School, a 7th grader with a whole future still being written. She was 5'2", with thick dark curls that framed a soft, quiet smile. She wore her backpack everywhere. She loved Hello Kitty. She loved Takis and soda and long afternoons at the corner store down the street. Elena Daff, the owner of that corner store, remembers her. She was just a kid, he would later say. Just a kid. Neighbors described her as a normal girl, bright, young, still figuring out who she was. Kaylee Cortez, who lived nearby, saw her on the street one afternoon and thought to herself, "Look at that girl. She has beautiful curls. That is a beautiful little girl." Kaylee had no idea that the next time she would see that face, it would be on a news screen. And the story attached to it would be one of the most disturbing in California in years. Here is what nobody knew yet. While Celeste was walking to the corner store for Takis and candy, she had already made contact with someone. Someone with millions of followers. Someone with a record deal and a song called Romantic Homicide. Someone who was not from her world at all, but had reached into it anyway. His name was David Anthony Burke. The world knew him as D4VD. He was 18 years old at the time. She was 12. They met online. That is how it started. Gaming. Discord. The kind of digital connection that feels harmless at first, where a username and an avatar can make age invisible. D4VD had built his career from exactly that world. He started by posting Fortnite clips to YouTube, gained traction online, taught himself to make music in his bedroom, and by 2022 had a record deal and a breakout hit that climbed global charts. He was the internet's golden boy. Young, talented, relatable. His fans adored him. And somewhere in that rise, he found Celeste. What prosecutors would later allege is that by September 2023, when she was 13 years old and he was 18, the relationship had crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. A criminal line. They allege that D4VD began a sexual relationship with a child, a 7th grader, a girl who still wore Hello Kitty slippers. But in January 2024, the world got to see them together. Not in court documents, not in a police report, on a Twitch livestream. There she was. Celeste, then 13, sitting beside a rising music star in a West Hollywood home linked to D4VD past midnight. They joked together, they laughed. Fans watched and clipped it and reposted it. And at some point during that stream, D4VD said something that, in hindsight, sounds less like a joke and more like a warning. He laughed and said, "Delete everything." Nobody paid attention to it then. It was late. It was a live stream. People say strange things. But write that down. Remember that line. We are going to come back to it. Between January and March 2024, a car was spotted near Celeste's neighborhood in Lake Elsinore multiple times. A black Tesla. Getting out of it was D4VD. Photographed. Documented. An 18-year-old music star, driving to a 7th grader's street. Around this same time, Celeste's family began to notice something was wrong. She was pulling away. She was disappearing for stretches of time. And then one day in early 2024, she did not come back at all. Her family reported her missing to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. Then they reported her missing again, and then again. 3 times in 1 year, Celeste Rivas Hernandez was reported as a missing child. And 3 times the response was the same. She was labeled a runaway. A runaway. A 13-year-old girl with a Hello Kitty backpack and curly hair was labeled a runaway, and the world moved on. Her parents put up flyers. The neighborhood saw the posters on telephone poles. People recognized her face. Some of those same neighbors would later say they had no idea what was really happening. No one did. Because the truth of where Celeste was and who she was with was still buried inside a web of digital messages, secret phones, and a relationship that law enforcement would later call criminal. Here is something that needs to sink in. When Celeste's parents took her phone away, trying to cut off contact, D4VD allegedly drove to Lake Elsinore and paid a junior high school student $1,000 in cash to hand Celeste a new phone he had bought for her. $1,000 to a child to maintain access to another child. Let that sit with you. And still, for most of 2024, the world had no idea. D4VD was on the rise. He was performing concerts in Los Angeles. His music was being streamed by tens of millions of people. And Celeste Rivas Hernandez was photographed backstage at one of his Los Angeles shows in June 2024. A 14-year-old girl, standing behind the curtain of a concert stage, in a world she was never supposed to be in. Meanwhile, someone out there was watching all of this unfold from a distance. Someone who had connected enough dots to be terrified. That person sat down and wrote an email to an address linked to D4VD's record label. They did not give their name. But they wrote, in plain language, that there was talk, that people were saying D4VD possibly had something to do with Celeste's disappearance. And then they wrote a line that was almost desperate in its simplicity. Please do the right thing, take her home. Her parents are very worried. That email was sent. Whether it was ever read and what happened after is part of a story that was still unraveling. Because while that email sat in an inbox somewhere, Celeste Rivas Hernandez was still missing. And April 23, 2025 was coming. If you are new to this channel, hit subscribe right now, because we cover cases like this every week and you do not want to miss a single one. April 23, 2025. The day is important for two reasons. On that day, tickets for D4VD's world tour went on pre-sale. His career was at a new peak. The tour was called Withered. Venues were filling up. Fans were buying tickets. And on that same day, Celeste Rivas Hernandez arrived at D4VD's rented home in the Hollywood Hills. She was 14 years old. The Lapt would later confirm she was last seen alive on that exact date, walking into that house, with someone she had been communicating with for over 2 years, someone who allegedly knew she was a minor. Someone who had been told by both the Riverside County Sheriff and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department during welfare checks that she was underage. She walked in, she never walked out. What happened inside that house between April 23 and the weeks that followed is the subject of an ongoing prosecution. But prosecutors have alleged a motive. They say that at some point during that visit, Celeste threatened to expose everything, the relationship, the abuse, the messages, the photos, all of it. She allegedly told him she would go public. She would ruin his career. Everything he had built, every stream, every concert, every ticket sale, every fan who had screamed his name in a venue would come crashing down. Prosecutors say that is when he made a decision. The world did not know any of this yet. D4V began his Withered tour on September 17, 2025. He performed, fans cheered. The lights were bright and the music was loud and everything looked exactly like it was supposed to look. But somewhere in the Hollywood Hills, parked on Bluebird Avenue, sat a white Tesla. Abandoned, not claimed, not driven. Just sitting there in the California heat for weeks on end. Neighbors started noticing it in late August. They complained about the smell. The car was eventually ticketed by the city, and on September 8, 2025, a tow truck driver hauled it to a Hollywood lot. That is where we started, that call, that smell, that trunk. When police opened the front trunk of that Tesla on September 8, 2025, they found remains, severely decomposed, dismembered, inside a bag. Investigators would later note that 2 of the victim's fingers were missing. The body had been in that car long enough that the heat of summer, sealed inside metal, had done what summer heat does. The lab began working immediately to identify the remains, and the process was painstaking. But within days, dental records confirmed what some had already feared. The remains belonged to Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Her body was identified one day after what would have been her 15th birthday. One day, the news broke like a wave over Lake Elsinore. First it was whispers at the corner store. Then it was phones lighting up. Then it was parents pulling their kids close and not letting go. Because the missing girl, the one whose flyers had been on every telephone pole, the one that everyone had hoped was okay somewhere, was not okay. She had never been okay, and she was never coming home. Kaylee Cortez, the neighbor who had once smiled watching Celeste walk down the street with her curly hair, heard the news and said she just could not breathe. She drove past the house where Celeste had grown up and stood there for a long time. Then she went home and started building a memorial. Flowers, candles, stuffed animals. A sign that said 3 words, "Justice for Celeste." That memorial grew every single day. Neighbors who had never spoken to Celeste's family stopped to lay flowers. People drove from other cities. Children left toys. A community was grieving a girl it realized it had not protected. And the grief very quickly turned into something louder, something with teeth. Because by now the car was known. The Tesla. And the name attached to that Tesla was known too. D4V'd. Within days of the discovery, lap detectives drove to a Hollywood Hills rental property associated with the singer. They served a search warrant on the home. Law enforcement sources told reporters that they were looking for digital devices, phones, laptops, hard drives, anything that could prove Celeste had been at that location. Anything that could connect the girl to the man. And what they found inside that house, according to prosecutors and court documents filed months later, was more than enough to build a case. The inflatable pool was there. Detectives noticed something wrong with it almost immediately. Multiple linear cuts ran along the interior lining. The kind of cuts that do not happen by accident. Samples taken from that pool tested positive for blood. Further testing would later match that genetic material to Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Let that image settle for a moment. An inflatable pool, inside a rented house, in the Hollywood Hills. Prosecutors would later allege that D4VD placed Celeste's body inside that pool to prevent her blood from spreading across the garage floor. That he used a chainsaw to dismember her remains. That he then placed those remains into bags and loaded them into the front trunk of his Tesla Model X. And then he went on tour. Court documents revealed that the last person to drive that Tesla was D4VD on July 19, 2025. Surveillance footage confirmed it. He drove it to a street in the Hollywood Hills, parked it, and left. Then he boarded a flight and began performing shows. City after city, song after song. The crowd chanting his name while Celeste Rivas Hernandez lay in a trunk less than 3 miles from the stage. Prosecutors would allege he carried Celeste in that car for weeks, possibly months. From May, when they believed she was killed, through the summer, while the California heat did its worst. Until the car sat so long on Bluebird Avenue that neighbors complained. Until the city ticketed it. Until a tow truck came. Until a worker at a Hollywood lot dialed 911 and said there was a smell. When D4V's spokesperson released a statement in early September 2025, right after the body was found, but before it had been officially identified, the language was careful, clinical. Spokesperson said the singer had been informed about what had happened and was fully cooperating with authorities. That he was still on tour. That he was cooperating. 2 weeks later, after Celeste was identified, everything changed. The tour was canceled. Not paused, not postponed. Canceled. The North American dates vanished from venue websites. The European shows disappeared. No explanation beyond a quiet statement about ongoing circumstances. And sources close to the investigation began telling reporters something different about the cooperation. That it had stopped. That D4V was no longer talking to police. His attorneys issued a statement. They said, "The actual evidence in this case will show that David Burke did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez and he was not the cause of her death." 3 lawyers, 1 statement, and an insistence that the evidence would clear him. But the evidence, according to prosecutors, was telling a very different story. Inside the Hollywood Hills home, on a camera that had been left behind, investigators found photographs, images of Celeste, a memory card that had not been wiped, digital breadcrumbs in a house that was supposed to have been cleaned out. On D4V's devices, prosecutors allege investigators found something even more damning. Something that would eventually be listed among the key evidence in the case. Child pornography. Images and videos of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a child that prosecutors say were documented proof of prolonged criminal conduct. This case was no longer just a missing person investigation. It was a homicide, it was a child sexual abuse case. And every day that passed brought more evidence, more documentation, more pieces of a picture that became harder and harder to look at. Back in Lake Elsinore, the Rivas family remained mostly silent. Their attorney, Patrick Steinfeld, spoke on their behalf. He said the family was heartbroken and devastated. He said they were committed to ensuring that Celeste's voice was heard throughout the process. The parents, Jesus Rivas and Mercedes Martinez, had not publicly commented at all yet. They were simply trying to survive the unsurvivable. Their daughter, the girl they had built a life for, the girl they had crossed borders for, had been taken, and not in a way that offered them any peace. The funeral was funded through a GoFundMe page started by someone in the community. The family needed help to lay their daughter to rest. They raised money. Strangers donated. Because Celeste deserved a burial, even if everything that had happened to her before it was beyond all comprehension. Here's something that nobody in the media talked about enough in those early weeks. Celeste had been reported missing 3 times. 3 separate reports filed with law enforcement. And each time she was categorized as a runaway, a voluntary case, a teenager making choices, but she was 13. And there are things that law enforcement is required to do when a child that young is reported missing, and there is reason to believe they may be with an adult. Questions must be asked. Leads must be followed. There is a protocol for a reason. Whether that protocol was followed completely in Celeste's case is something investigators have faced quiet criticism over. The lab chief, Jim McDonnell, acknowledged publicly that throughout the 7-month investigation, the department faced criticism for how it handled certain aspects, for the decision not to release details publicly, for the timeline of events. "My duty is not to fuel speculation," McDonnell said at a press conference. "It is to deliver justice, and that requires patience and discipline." But for a family that filed missing persons reports 3 times and heard nothing useful back, patience had run out a long time ago. Now here is where this case takes a turn that is hard to process even now. When investigators began tracing the full timeline, they found something that stopped everyone cold. D4V had not just met Celeste as a teenager. According to Celeste's former teacher, who spoke publicly about what he knew, the two had connected online when she was 11 years old. 11. Through social media. Through the kind of parasocial digital pipeline that platforms have spent years refusing to regulate. She was 11, he was already building a career. And prosecutors allege that by the time she was 13 and he was 18, what had started online had become something that carried criminal charges. A sexual relationship with a child. That was the context for everything that came after. For every disappearance, for every missing persons report, for every time someone saw Celeste and D4V together and assumed it was innocent fan interaction. He was photographed near her school. He was photographed on her street. They sat together past midnight on a Twitch stream that his fans clipped and saved and replayed. She was backstage at his concert. She had a tattoo on her right index finger. Shh. The same tattoo was on D4VD's right index finger. Matching. A secret between them written permanently on their skin. Prosecutors would later include the matching tattoos in the evidence narrative. 2 people. Same tattoo. Same finger. And the word itself, shh, carries its own quiet horror when you understand what was allegedly being kept secret. By early 2026, the grand jury investigation was deepening. D4V had been named a target. Law enforcement sources told reporters that charges were coming, that the evidence was solid, that the case being built was not circumstantial. It was documented. It was physical. It was digital, and it was devastating. The fans had split into factions online. Some of them could not believe it. This was the person whose music they had played on repeat, whose songs about love and heartbreak had soundtracked their lives. His biggest hit, Romantic Homicide, had been streamed hundreds of millions of times. And now those lyrics, which had once felt poetic and melancholy, read like something else entirely. "In the back of my mind, you died, and I didn't even cry. Not a single tear." Fans screenshotted those lyrics and posted them in silence. Because sometimes the most chilling details are the ones hiding in plain sight. And then came the morning of April 16, 2026. A squad of local and federal officers arrived at a Hollywood Hills home. Not far from the tow yard where Celeste's body had been found 7 months earlier. They battered down the door and took David Anthony Burke into custody. David was arrested on suspicion of murder. If you have stayed with me this long, please hit the like button right now. It tells the algorithm this story matters. It means more people hear about Celeste. April 16, 2026. The door came off its hinges at 6 in the morning. Officers moved through the house fast and quiet, the way they always do when they have been planning for a long time. David Anthony Burke, 21 years old, did not fight. He was taken outside in handcuffs. And the LAP public information officer posted 4 sentences to social media that would be shared millions of times within the hour. Detectives from the Los Angeles Police Department, Robbery Homicide Division, have arrested David Burke, a 21-year-old resident of Los Angeles, for the murder of Celeste Rivas. Burke is being held without bail. No bail, that detail matters. In the California criminal system, no bail is reserved for cases where the court believes the defendant is either a flight risk, an extreme danger to the community, or both. David Burke was not going home, not that day, not for a very long time. 4 days later, he stood in a courtroom at the Clara Shortridge Foltz Criminal Justice Center in Los Angeles. His defense attorneys flanked him, Marilyn Bednarski on one side, Blair Burke and Regina Peter waiting nearby. Burke stood behind his attorney, head slightly down as the charges were read aloud. First-degree murder, with special circumstances. Continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14 years old. Mutilating human remains, 3 counts, each one worse than the last. Each one describing a chapter of what prosecutors allege was done to a 14-year-old girl from Lake Elsinore who loved Hello Kitty and Tatakis and candy from the corner store down the street from her house. D4V entered his plea in a quiet voice. Not guilty. His attorneys had already issued their statement. The actual evidence, they said, would show that David Burke did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez, that he was not the cause of her death. They were signaling a fight. This was going to go to trial. And in a case this complex, with this much evidence, that trial would be long and it would be brutal, and it would drag every detail back into daylight. But here is what the prosecution had already laid out. Here is the motive. Because in true crime stories, the motive is always the door that opens everything else. Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman stood in front of cameras at a press conference in late April 2026. He said the words directly. He said D4VD killed Celeste Rivas Hernandez when she threatened to expose his criminal conduct and devastate his musical career. That was the motive. She knew everything. She had lived it. She had the messages. She had the photos. She had years of documented contact. She had a tattoo on her finger that matched his. And prosecutors allege that at some point during her visit to his Hollywood Hills home on April 23, 2025, the same day his tour tickets went on pre-sale, she told him she was done being silent. Think about what that means. A 14-year-old girl in a house alone with a man who had allegedly been controlling her movements and her communication for over a year, finding the courage to say she was going to speak. She was going to tell the truth. She was going to let people know what had been happening to her. Prosecutors allege he made his decision that day. The special circumstances attached to the first-degree murder charge give this case an additional weight that cannot be overstated. Under California law, special circumstances on a murder charge can mean the difference between a life sentence with the possibility of parole and a sentence with no possibility of parole ever. Prosecutors allege 3 separate special circumstances: lying in wait, financial gain, and murdering a witness in an investigation. That last one, murdering a witness. Because if Celeste had spoken, she would not just have ended his career. She would have been a witness to years of documented criminal conduct. She would have been the most important voice in a prosecution that would have put him away. Prosecutors allege he chose to silence that voice permanently, with a chainsaw, in a garage, inside a rented house in the Hollywood Hills. And then he bought tickets to his own world tour. Court documents revealed additional details about what investigators found at the home. Multiple linear cuts in the inflatable pool consistent with cutting. Blood samples on the pool lining that tested positive as human. DNA matching Celeste. Fragments of physical evidence throughout the garage. And on the camera found left behind in the house, a memory card with photographs. Images of Celeste. Evidence of her presence in a place she should never have been. Prosecutors also confirmed that the autopsy report, signed by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner in December 2025, had been sealed for months at the request of law enforcement. They did not want it public yet. They needed the investigation to stay clean. But when it was finally released in April 2026, it described Celeste injuries in language that the medical examiner called clinical and dispassionate. Multiple penetrating injuries. Wounds on the chest and abdomen that may represent sharp force injuries. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. She was stabbed, multiple times, at 14 years old, in someone's garage, with no one there to help her. The autopsy also noted something about her right index finger. A tattoo reading "shh" was found on her skin. Permanent. Exactly where D4VD has the same tattoo. A secret she wore on her body, that she carried with her everywhere. That was still on her finger when they identified her remains through dental records. The community of Lake Elsinore held a vigil in September 2025, right after the identification. Dozens of people gathered with candles. Many of them did not know Celeste personally. They came anyway, because that is what you do when a child is failed by the systems that were supposed to protect her, and by a person who took her trust and weaponized it. Kaylee Cortez, the neighbor, was there. She said something that stayed in people's minds long after the vigil ended. "I don't want her remembered as Rebel's kid," she said. "I don't want her remembered as a runaway." That word, runaway. It had followed Celeste through 3 missing persons reports. It had been used to close cases that should have been opened wider. And now, standing in a parking lot with a candle in her hand, Kaylee was demanding that everyone undo the damage that word had done. Celeste was not a runaway. She was a child who met someone online at 11 years old, someone older. Someone who had reach and resources and a car and a record deal, and a way of making a young girl feel seen in a small, quiet city where not much happened. She was groomed, she was exploited, and when she became a liability, prosecutors alleged she was killed. She was a child. The family of Celeste Rivas Hernandez issued their first public statement through their attorney in late April 2026. They had said nothing for months, not because they did not have words, but because grief does not always have words. Their attorney, Patrick Steinfeld, said the family would be present at the district attorney's press conference, that they were committed to ensuring Celeste's voice was heard throughout the legal process, that her memory would be honored. Jesus Rivas and Mercedes Martinez, who had built a life in California so their daughter could have a future, did not speak publicly themselves. Some things are beyond what words can carry. There is a memorial outside the house where Celeste grew up. It is not temporary. Kaylee Cortez, the neighbor, tends to it every single day. She said she makes something new for every holiday. For Valentine's Day. For Christmas. She leaves flowers and candles and toys. She called it a labor of love. Because someone has to keep showing up for Celeste. Someone has to keep saying her name. The investigation continues. The trial has not yet begun. D4VD remains held without bail. His legal team remains committed to a not guilty defense. And the questions around this case are still multiplying. How long did this go on before anyone in a position of institutional authority put all the pieces together? What did platforms see, and when? What did the music industry know? What does this case say about the digital pipelines that connect adults to children without any meaningful safeguard? The lap faced criticism for the pace of its investigation, for the months of silence, for the decision to keep details away from the public. Chief McDonald defended those choices. He said the goal was justice, not speculation, that patience was required, that nothing could be allowed to jeopardize the case. And perhaps he was right. Perhaps the sealed autopsy and the careful evidence collection and the 7-month runway before the arrest was exactly what built an airtight prosecution. But Celeste's family had been filing missing persons reports since early 2024, and by April 23, 2025, she walked into a house and did not walk out. Somewhere between those two dates, something was missed, something went unseen, or something was seen and not acted on fast enough. And that gap, that space between the first report and the last day she was alive, is a wound in this story that may never fully close. D4VD's fans are still processing. Some have deleted his music from their playlists. Some have posted tribute artwork to Celeste online. Some are still asking for more information before they decide what to believe. And some have done what people always do in the social media age, turn the case into content, into debate, into something that lives inside a trending hashtag. But underneath all of that noise is a girl, curly hair, Hello Kitty slippers, a backpack, a corner store she visited almost every single day, a mom and a dad who crossed borders so she could have a better life, a 7th grader who was just starting to figure out who she was, and a world that found out her name the worst possible way. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14 years old when she died. She was identified one day after what would have been her 15th birthday. Her remains were found in a trunk, in a tow yard, in a city that did not know she was there. She deserved so much better than any of this. She deserved to finish 7th grade. She deserved to go to high school and hate her homework and figure out what she wanted to be. She deserved to grow old in a world that did not eat children alive. Remember her name, not just as the girl in the trunk, not as a case number, not as a headline, as Celeste, the girl with the beautiful curls, the one who loved Hello Kitty and candy and afternoons at the corner store. Say her name. And now, 3 questions that this case leaves behind. Questions that deserve serious answers. How does a man with millions of followers allegedly groom a child for 3 years, appear with her in public live streams and at concerts, drive to her neighborhood multiple times, and not be stopped by a single institution along the way? What responsibility do music labels, streaming platforms, and the industry surrounding young artists bear when the warning signs are visible and the culture of silence protects the powerful over the vulnerable? And if Celeste had been from a wealthier family, from a more prominent community, from a world with more resources and louder voices, would she have been called a runaway 3 times? Or would someone have found her sooner? Leave your answers in the comments. This case is not over. There is a trial coming. There are facts still being uncovered. And Celeste's family is still fighting for justice in a courtroom that cannot give them back what they lost. Subscribe to this channel if you want to follow every update on this case and on others like it. Click the bell so you do not miss a single video. And if this story stayed with you, share it. Because every person who knows Celeste's name is another voice demanding that the systems that failed her never fail another child. For Celeste, for her family, and for every child whose story is still being written in silence somewhere right now. We are not done talking about this, and neither should you be.